Hey guys, it's Game Freak here. So, a while ago I had mentioned that I wanted to do a video about Mythra specifically based around Xenoblade 2 and Torna. And I think I'm finally ready to do that video. Now, from jump, spoilers for both, be prepared, don't watch it, because this video is essentially going to be me explaining Mythra in herself as a character and also why I like her so much. A lot of people go, oh, it's Team Pyra, but after watching Torna, and it's weird because I already played the base game, so I knew the way Torna was probably going to end, and Torna's ending still hit me harder than I expected it to. But I want to do this video for her because I truly enjoy her character, her development, and how she was portrayed. So I guess we need to start in Torna since that is technically the beginning. Now, I know a lot of people from Jump tend to ship Pyra with Rex and Mythra with Adam because that's the way they see it. But if you play Torna, it's obvious that they both go to Rex, and the reason why is simple. Mythra's story in Torna was essentially Xenoblade's 2 story, but rushed. It's almost like she was heading, because the reality is that Adam was leading Mythra down the same path Rex would end up leading her down, but they didn't have the time. Adam and Hugo and Laura did not have the time for that development, and Mythra needed it most. The way I kind of look at Torna is that, like, unlike how it is in 2, it's almost a reversal. In Torna, everyone's kind of already maturity-wise ahead, and Mythra's playing catch-up. It's the reverse in 2, where Mythra's ahead and everyone's playing catch-up to Mythra, or at least specifically Rex is playing catch-up to Mythra. And it's an interesting perspective switch. It's you can also kind of tell that Mythra is still early in her development. I think in the story Adam mentions that Mythra had only been awakened maybe a year or two prior to when Torna starts. So Mythra is definitely the baby out of the blades that you're introduced to in Torna. And a lot of her development is that she's kind of caught in this weird crossroads. Whereas, and even Malos is like this, which is what I'm about to make the comparison to. Mythra is somewhere in between, like, Malos' mindset and, like, Rex mindset. Like, she's right there at the crossroads, and even though she's leaning towards the Rex side, she still has a few Malos-isms in there. That's kind of why she still disconnects herself from the like. I think in Torna she ends up saying a line, something on the lines of "Oh wow, a blade siding with a human," as if that's it's a foreign concept to her. I think she's talking to Jin, I believe. And it's like, she acts like it's a foreign concept. Well, it's because you're talking to a young Mythra, a young Aegis that doesn't really know the way of the world. It's kind of like, and even Malos is more like unhinged instead of being more focused and mature like he is in Xenoblade 2's base. But in Torna, he's a lot more kind of weirdly unhinged, whereas Mythra is a lot more unsure of her position because she's still trying to go into the cross. She's still at the crossroads, even though, like I said, she's leaning towards the Rex side of the crossroad, but it's still like a slow transition. And to be fair, the team and everyone, Milton and the crew, were kind of edging her into the right direction, but everything was happening so fast, she didn't get the time she needed to make the full trip. So by the time they fought Malos, you're dealing with a barely developed or half-developed Mythra who hasn't really made the emotional journey she needs to. Because one of the things you notice is that Mythra in Torna is very immature, very reckless, just not a honed Mythra. Ironically enough, the things that she ends up chastising Rex for in the base game is things that she ends up doing herself. Even just the way she fights. Like in the base game, in Xenoblade 2, she's calm, collected, and using her abilities properly. Whereas in 2, the first cutscene you see with her, she's fighting Jin and Laura, she's using her artifice. She actively tries to avoid using her artifice throughout Xenoblade 2, especially early when she's introduced, which I believe is around the end of Chapter 3. She's intentionally trying to hold off on the artifice, and it's because of Torna. It's weird, it's a cool thing because what it really says is that Mythra at least learned from her actions in Torna and became the Mythra that we know now. Although this has its good and bad sides to it. One of the things in the jokes you probably heard about Torna is that it's essentially the Mythra roasting session, because they roast the hell out of her throughout the entirety of Torna. Now, granted, the reason is because she's immature and she's not on their level intellectually or mentally yet. She doesn't really get it. This is kind of a cool switch because if you played 2 first, it's almost like, wow, she's the baby here. But the other thing is that it's edging her development. Like, she's in, like, this is the direction you need to be looking at. And they're kind of helping her. I also think, though, that this ends up having a negative effect on her. And I'll explain more as we get into it. Now, to get to the ending of Torna and why I personally like, this is kind of, because to me this is where her starting line is almost. At the end of Torna, she's fighting Malos with everybody, and she kind of loses herself. Because her and Adam's connection, although I would say we'll probably have hit the same level as Rex and hers at the end of Xenoblade 2 if given enough time, but because it had to be rushed and she didn't get the time she needed, she doesn't have full control. She hasn't fully matured. She hasn't hit the level she was meant to hit. So although she's able to stop Mallow, she doesn't put him down for good, and she ends up causing a bunch of damage in the process. And everyone originally, when they were showing off the characters for Xenoblade Torna, the Golden Country, we were like, well, who's this kid with them? Okay, fine, that's Mikal. We know who Mikal is. We know what happens to Mikal. But who's this Milton kid we keep seeing? A Gormati boy that we don't know, for the most part, isn't in the base game because it's 500 years later. What's the importance of this kid? Well, this kid is essentially kind of the trigger for where Mythra's mind goes, essentially. Because she ends up, technically she ends up indirectly getting Milton killed. Throughout the fight, it ends up destroying Torna as itself, ends up indirectly killing Milton, and the shock in the realization of that, considering Milton next to Adam was like one of her closest relationships throughout the entirety of Torna, it broke her. She couldn't take it. And it essentially caused a bunch of PTSD, and she just kind of emotionally fell. That's why after the sequence in which Mick holds Milton's dead body away from Mythra, and she kind of loses it, the next scene we see isn't Mythra, it's Pyra. And this kind of gets into why I don't necessarily like Pyra as much as Mythra. Because Pyra is a result of Mythra. Pyra, and this is getting into the situation involving all the roasting she goes through in Torna. Although I think it helped egg her in the right direction, it also became the source of a lot of her insecurities, which are what Pyra is. Pyra is a manifestation of almost all of Mythra's insecurities. That she's immature, and she's too rash and reckless, which is why Pyra is very kind, gentle, and sweet. And she's not very gun-ho. She's not as aggressive as Mythra is, because that's what got her in trouble, and that's the other reason why you can tell Mythra doesn't even like her power. She hates it because of what it caused, hence why when Pyra fights, Pyra uses a completely different element, and she's weaker, severely weaker than Mythra, because it's another insecurity. A few smaller things is the fact that even though we do know in the base game that Mythra can't cook, it isn't as, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not as much of a gag, and it's not as pushed upon as it is in Torna. And don't you find it interesting that for some reason Pyra can cook, but Mythra can't? It's almost like she took a lot of the criticism she took in Torna, manifested it into Pyra's being. Like the way Pyra is and the way she acts, and just Pyra in herself is a manifestation of the person she would like to be closer to. A weaker, kinder, gentler Blade who has more control of herself and her emotions and shit. and that hurts. Like honestly, I think after I finished, after I came to this realization, you look at Pyre. Pyre just kind of makes me sad now, and it's not really Pyre's fault. And this was bound to happen because it kind of dehumanizes Pyre in a way. But that's the reality of the situation. That Pyre exists in the way she is because of what happened in Torna. Not only the events that cause people dying and death and all that, but also just all the little things, like all the little jokes and jabs at her, just built up, and Pyre is a manifestation of that. And it hurts, honestly, when I look at Pyre, because I know that's what she is. No, although Pyre has her own faults and feelings, it still hurts to look at her. And that's a big deal, dude. I think one of the best scenes in 2 that gets highly overlooked is the sequence in which it's when we find out that Amalthus has the other half of Hayes' core crystal and is using it to control other blades to kind of do what he wants. And he ends up trying to control Mythra, and Mythra and him and even Rex eventually are fighting for control. And then one of her lines is, "I'm Rex's blade." That is a huge thing because she never says that to Adam. She never goes out and makes that kind of declaration. Now, granted, some people would say, well, the plot didn't call for it. But, as I mentioned before, Mythra in Torna was very disconnected emotionally. She kind of didn't ever get to that point where she even really believed into the Blade human system as much. Like, obviously she participated, but it wasn't on the same tier as like this full 100% trust in each other. And that's one of the things, the reason why I say Rex is kind of Mythra's true master. Not trying to discredit Adam, although to be fair, I think history in two's history overblows Adam because of how the history was changed to make Adam look like more of a hero than he actually is in the main game. Actually, from what we see in Torna. Rex, and I guess the best analogy to use for this is that Adam's problem is that he needed to slow down for Mythra. Rex's problem in 2 was that he needed to catch up with Mythra. And see, when you're constantly being challenged by enemies who are stronger than you, it's way easier to grind up to get to another person's level than to slow down to match someone at a lower level than you. And I think that was the core of the issue. The Rex was in a position where he could grow and catch up to Mythra. And throughout 2, you can see that Rex is able to kind of pick up where Adam left off. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the whole thing with that big clash of Jin and Malos and over Pyra's mortal, I guess, unconscious body with the 2 representations of Mythra and Pyra sitting there talking about, don't worry about us, we're not important. You know why we wanted to go to Elysium? Because we wanted to die. We wanted Father to kill us. And why is that? Because Mythra, even through the events of 2, was still guilt-ridden. Because she even says it in 2 that even though it was 500 years ago, she's been asleep. So to her, it doesn't feel like 500 years. It feels like it just happened a few weeks ago. So it's not like her development just kind of stopped. I mean, it just deleted and had to be reset. It just kind of paused, and we're just picking up from it. That's why she's suicidal all the way up until, I think, what is that, chapter 8 or 9, I think, is when she finally kind of has gotten. That's probably the reason why she says I think when she makes her own little declaration about how I've made my own choice not to live in fear, because she was afraid of her power because of what it did before in the past and the things that it caused. It caused a lot of emotional stress for her. And it tore her down.
Adam told me something. He told me to fight for the things that I wanted to protect. I made my choice. I fight for you and Pyra. I mean, I'm still not good enough for you, but...
Don't say that. I've made a choice as well. Not to live in fear.
I think the advantage in 2 is that you're with a different cast of characters who were emotionally not all the way above you. I think she needed someone at her level or a little bit lower to kind of relate to kind of get that growth. And even getting into some of the subtle things, like the first time we are introduced to Mythra after that first introduction scene, which I'm starting to believe that Mythra wasn't really asleep like the way she says he was. I think Mythra was forcing herself to be asleep, but I don't think she ever was asleep. Because Pyra and Mythra share memories. But the first sequence, she goes, "Why did you wake me up?" She goes, "Rex, why did you wake me up?" Which doesn't make any sense because the sequence in which she wakes up is when Vandam just died, and Rex is getting his ass kicked because he's too stubborn to walk away from the fight, and Pyrus is the one who screams no. Realistically, it's Pyra that wakes her up. But the fact that she knows, she correlates it to Rex waking her up. It's kind of a thing. And also I'm starting to wonder, and even some of her smaller quirks, like the fact that she sleepwalks, quote unquote. I don't think that's sleepwalking. I think she tends to. I think that's her subconscious at work. Because think about it, in the Torna cutscene where they do the same joke, she ends up cuddling with Milton, which is, like I said, next to Adam, one of the characters she had the strongest connections with. In 2, she ends up cuddling next to Rex. She even does it in at the end of chapter 8, I believe. Like when they end up in Mythra and she's like lying and she's sleeping in Rex's lap. I think that was a good sequence to show that it's not a simple, oh, I'm doing this because of a weird gag. I think she does it because she likes, subconsciously, she wants to be near people. She doesn't want to be away from people. It's just that her mind overrides her heart and she ends up kind of pushing people away in that sense. Hence why, and it's a part of her personality, she's a tsundere, and she has hard times expressing herself. That's the core of her issue. She sucks at expressing herself. Hence why Pyra doesn't have that problem. She's very open and honest. And that's the interesting thing. And as the game continues, you can see Rex more and more getting her to open up to the rest of them. And it creates some beautiful moments. She even picks up some of Adam's quirks. So even that whole blade adaptation thing, she gained quirks from Adam even if they weren't together as long as some may have wanted. Technically, though, at the end of 2, she was still with Adam longer than she was with Rex. I think she was only with Rex for a little while. But the big thing about, for example, like picking up the fact that like Adam is overly sensitive to like that kind of stuff, and Mythra wasn't. Back then, she wasn't.
Thanks.
Adam, and that shows you that Adam laid groundwork. Adam laid the bridge, and Rex just had to finish it off and cross it. Adam didn't get the chance to do all that. And in some cases, I don't think Adam was the guy that was supposed to do all that. I think he was too ahead of her, and he couldn't slow down. I just really enjoy her character, man. It's part of the reason why I always will say Mythra over Pyra. I like Pyra, I'm not going to lie to you. But Pyra won't ever have that depth because she's a part of Mythra. She's a part of Mythra's development. I know people have their issues with both, but I think Mythra is, she's so good. She's so good. Which, to be fair, makes Pyra good in connection. She just can't be as good because she isn't the main body. And a lot of me, I'm still happy that they use both models and they're both still around. Because if nothing else, I think Pyra also serves as kind of a more balance. It's kind of like Mythra needed an emotional balance as far as a power balance too. Where Pyra can kind of keep Mythra in check. Even some of the subtle things. Like in the beginning game, you see Pyra standing at the tree and she's looking out to Elysium and you hear this bell ringing. Well, later on in the game, you hear that same bell ringing, but it's Pyra and Mythra at the tree, and it's like, well, the bell stopped ringing. And they make this statement about how the bell is supposed to be their heart, but something else is ringing. And it's not really a ringing. The ringing is more so a need. It's a need they need. And ironically enough, Mythra's the one who pushes it first instead of Pyra, who up until this point has been very pro-Rex throughout this whole game. Like, she's the one doing all the Rex calls and like, she's been the one very focused on Rex, whereas Mythra's been more balanced. Mythra's the one who suggests we need to go to Rex. But she doesn't normally do that. That's why I say one of the best moments is the on Rex's blade, because that's a clear indication that she has grown, and that not only has Adam had an effect on her, but Rex has had an effect on her, and she's finally become the blade she needed to be. That's why when you fight the end boss at the end of the game, the fight is barely about Pyra or Mythra. It's more about Malus, because Pyra and Mythra have already finished their arc by the time you get up there. By the time you get up there, the only thing left is to emotionally save Mallows. That's all you need to do, because everybody else has already kind of completed their little emotional internal trials. And I just think she's a great character. She's a character who went through a lot and struggled and didn't really, and kind of got thrown into a world she had no real control over. But she was able to see the beauty of this world by sticking it out. Even through running away, in a sense, by hiding out for 500 years or so, she still allowed herself to be available to be saved and touched by another individual. And it just so happened that fate kind of threw Rex at her, and Rex is what she needed. And in a way, it's what Pyra needed too. Because Pyra was barely born. She barely knew Adam. She was just kind of existing. But see, now Pyra. And eventually, I think Numa will be the default form, which I'm perfectly cool with. I think she should reserve the right to change throughout the forms. But hey, if they want to keep all three forms, I'm cool with that shit too. Just saying. I don't know. I just kind of wanted to gush about it. I think it's a really interesting story, and I think it's a cool development chain they went through with her. And I think she's a really good character. I just like her. I like her a lot. But please leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching. This has been the Insane Game Freak. Like I said again, play to win, and I will catch you guys later. Xenoblade 2 is the greatest. It's my favorite RPG of this generation right now. And that's even including some of the Wii U games. Like Tokyo Mirage Sessions is great. Fire Emblem Fates is great. No one's touching that Xenoblade 2. Xenoblade 2 has a hook on me. And the only game that's going to come close to that is maybe Pokemon next year, which we'll see how that goes. But hey, anywho, thank you guys for watching. Catch you guys later. Peace. Oh.